everyone. In this particular video, I'm planning to give you some sort of an explanation on metaphysical poetry, about metaphysical poets, and the features of metaphysical poets, and what makes metaphysical poetry different from the rest of the conventional poetry. Now, beginning with, I would like to begin with Renaissance humanism. I hope you are familiar with Renaissance humanism. Renaissance is actually a major step in the history of English literature, a kind of a paradigm shift from the sort of divinistic orientation which was very much prevalent, or which permeated in the operation of medieval thinking. See, divinism or divinistic orientation means that, see, whatever you see around, the ultimate answer for everything that you see around, the miracles that happen, the things that you see around us, everything was actually attributed to God. See, we wonder at we did wonder at the creation of God. Any miracles were explained in terms of God, in terms of the divine power. God was all the time attributed as a sort of instrumental force behind all the miracles that was happening. So this was the kind of divinistic thinking which was prevalent in the medieval times. Now, what happened with Renaissance is that Renaissance, I hope you are familiar with Renaissance. Renaissance is a kind of a paradigm shift which is very important when you are learning English literature, in the history of English literature. Now, Renaissance humanism, see, in divinistic orientation, say for example, if you take some sort of a thing like aeroplane, for example, you wonder at what kind of a creation it is. God has actually created it, right? But when it comes to Renaissance humanism, the importance was given to human beings as such. The intellect of human beings was given importance. You see the aeroplane, you see the ship, you see anything around, you see all sorts of inventions, and you wonder at human imagination, because all the things are actually product of human imagination in Renaissance humanism. So you wonder at mankind instead of wondering at the creations of God. So now what happens is this humanistic center of thought, which came as part of Renaissance humanism, and which was very much against the medieval divinism, brought about a paradigm shift in the thinking process. And metaphysical poetry or metaphysical poets are a group of poets who are part and parcel of this shift, or part and parcel of this paradigm shift from the divinistic oriented thinking on to the humanistic oriented thinking. So in that sense, we can say that metaphysical group of poets, they were a very radical group actually, a very divergent and iconoclast group who very much questioned the status quo. See, you did have, in Elizabethan era, you did have this Renaissance humanism coming, and Shakespeare commenting, or in Macbeth he says, what a piece of work is man. So that kind of an orientation onto human beings, onto human intellect, onto the human imagination was given importance during the Elizabethan period. And you have university wits at that time, you have metaphysical poets, and metaphysical poetry is of course a part and parcel of this paradigm shift, like other university wits, all kinds of people, all kinds of other groups. Now, you have metaphysical poetry which actually questioned the status quo in every way. They were questioning the kind of conventionality in everything, thematically and formally, form-wise. They were questioning all kinds of mainstreamism. And the term, I hope you're familiar with metaphysical poets. John Donne, Andrew Marvell, Richard Crashaw, Henry Vaughan, George Herbert, Abraham Cowley. These are some of the major metaphysical poets that we are familiar with. Now, what is this metaphysical poetry? What are the characteristics of metaphysical poetry? How does metaphysical poetry become a radical group as such, a radical move as such? Who used this term metaphysical for the first time? Let's look into it, and we would of course analyze some poems from the metaphysical point of view. Now, the term metaphysical, as it is applied to poetry, was first used by Dr. Johnson. But Dr. Johnson borrowed this particular phrase, metaphysics, from Dryden. Dryden's phrase about Donne. Dryden talks about Donne that, I quote, he affects metaphysics. That is what Dryden talked about John Donne. He affects metaphysics, which he was talking about Donne's poetry in his work Discourse Concerning Satire, which was published in the year 1693. And it was Dr. Johnson who actually took the term from Dryden and extended it, this particular term, metaphysical, from Donne onto other metaphysical poets in his very famous work, Life of Cowley. So, at first, this particular term was used as a term of contempt. I mean, because this group of poets, be it Andrew Marvell, be it John Donne, Abraham Cowley, all these people, they deviated from the so-called habitualized or normal course or natural course of writing poetry. Dr. Johnson said that according to the Aristotelian standards, these poets, these metaphysical poets could not be called poets because they did not imitate anything. Poetry, according to Aristotle, is an imitative art. The thoughts that these metaphysical poets were putting forward was very new but not natural. Not something which they were used to, not something which they were used to. Instead, it was very much novel in every sense. So, in metaphysical poetry, as Dr. Johnson himself says, you might be familiar with this quotation that the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. So they were always taking up unexpected, surprising, or they were always giving unexpected and surprising turn to everything. Now, what are the characteristics of metaphysical poetry? As I told you, metaphysical style, it got established by John Donne in 17th century. And it was Dryden who first of all called Donne metaphysical. I mean, that Donne affects metaphysics. And Donne was a person, I hope you're familiar with this fact that Donne was a priest, but he did have this conflict in him concerning the divine and the human. So Donne was a person who makes nice speculations of philosophy when he should engage our hearts and souls with softness and mellifluousness of love. So, we were talking about the characteristics of metaphysical poetry. What are the main characteristics of metaphysical poetry? As a radical school, I already mentioned that metaphysical poetry is a radical school. So, as a radical school, both metaphysical poets were experimenting in form as well as in theme. They were experimenting with sort of novelty in form as well as in theme. So, formally and thematically, they were deviating from the so-called existing paradigms of poetry and formal paradigms or formal aspects of poetry. So, let's talk about the theme first. How far is metaphysical poetry, the theme of metaphysical poetry, different from the theme of other poetry? So, the first point when we are talking about theme is metaphysical poets found delight in new themes. New themes in the sense novel themes, radical themes, unconventional themes. See, say for example, the way metaphysical poets treated love was entirely different from the way Petrarchan sonnets or treated love, or medieval literary men treated love. It was quite different. and the way human nature was treated, the way sexual love was treated in Petrarchan sonnets, where of course, as you all know, those are filled with mellifluousness, idealization, etc., which is what Donne, including Donne, or metaphysical poets including Donne, questioned. They questioned the Christian concept of love. Probably in most of the poems we see that Donne preferred earth to paradise. That is why probably he was bent on canonizing lovers, which was very much opposed by Christianity. So that is the first feature of metaphysical poetry. They found delight in new themes. The themes that they took up were very radical. Say for example, if you're taking canonization, how come you canonize lovers, right? Canonization is a very divine sort of a process, right? Now what Donne does is Donne is canonizing lovers, and he is, of course, it's an argument in verse, right? He argues it, how come you can canonize lovers? So that's a very beautiful representation of love, metaphysical representation. So this is how metaphysical poetry differ from the rest of the poetry, like Petrarchan, common, conventional sort of poetry. Now the second feature of metaphysical poetry is they use different branches of learning. See, most of the time we see that they were writing erudite poetry. The poetry is very much filled, very much pregnant with their own scholarship. See, you can see Dr. Johnson, who says in his Life of Cowley, Life of Abraham Cowley, he says, I quote, "They were men of learning, and showing their learning was their primary aim." So what happens is, they were taking subjects from different branches of epistemology, like geography, alchemy, astrology, astronomy, cosmology, history. So they were bringing all branches into poetry. So the poet, metaphysical poet, actually ransacks all fields of knowledge, and it is being brought into poetry. Say for example, you take the poem The Sun Rising, which is a very beautiful poem where history is being brought, both India's of spice and mine. So all these things, huntsmen, you have canonization where you see the merchants' ships being brought here, wars, lawyers, soldiers, all sorts of people are being brought into the poem. So you see metaphysical poets bringing or ransacking all sorts of knowledge from different parts of different genres, different fields, and they're bringing it into poetry. So they wanted probably to show off their knowledge. Their poetry is very much erudite in nature. So that is the second characteristic of metaphysical poetry. Now, as far as theme is concerned, what happens with metaphysical poetry is that they were finding new thoughts. As I told you, the thoughts were very radical, very unconventional, and they were purely original thoughts, right? Beautifully put original thoughts, and they were working out their own manner of expressing them. You see, the noble thoughts were expressed in noble ways. They did not follow the so-called conventional way of narrating or conventional way of writing poetry. They did not go along the already trodden pathways. They work out to seek a sort of a logical connection between the abstract and the concrete. They were trying to mix a sort of a mixture of intellectualized passion and passionate intellectuality could be seen there. Say for example, the comparison of the twin souls of the lovers to the stiff twin compasses, where he is unifying both thought and emotion, which is what you see in T.S. Eliot's essay, Metaphysical Poetry, where he talks about this unification of sensibility, where metaphysical poetry is a group of poets who actually they are able to unify thought and feeling. There is a mixture of thought and feeling coming together, intellect and passion coming together. So that is the third feature as far as theme is concerned. Now, coming to the form of the metaphysical poetry. See, it's very interesting when you're talking about the form, because it is very unconventional. The way that Donne writes, the way that Andrew Marvell or Richard Creshaw writes is very unconventional. And you see that the first feature, when you're talking about the form of the poetry, the first feature that you find in metaphysical poetry is their abrupt opening. See, we can take some examples. With sunrising, I'll just begin with sunrising. How does he begin? It's very abrupt, right? Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? It's a very abrupt beginning that you see, right? Then when you're taking canonization, you see, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me laugh. So this is the sort of abrupt beginning that you see in metaphysical poetry. Then that is abrupt opening. Then the second feature that you find in metaphysical poetry is the use of far-fetched images. That is, heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. So what happens? What is this far-fetched images? The combination of this far-fetched images is what you call metaphysical conceit. See, I'll talk about that. Far-fetched images means metaphysical poets show how seemingly contradictory ideas or things can be yoked together, can be brought together. Say, for example, Donne is comparing the flea to a marriage bed, right? It's a very beautiful comparison, very far-fetched image, of course. See, I'll just read it out. The poem is titled The Flea by John Donne. Mark but this flea, and mark in this, how little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first, and now sucks thee. And in this flea our two bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that this cannot be said a sin, nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead. Now what happens is you are comparing, there is a comparison of a flea, right? A flea to a marriage bed, because the flea has bitten me, the flea has bitten you, we both lovers are bitten by the same flea. So we can, of course, I mean, it's already done. It's already done. Our blood is already mingled. So that kind of a far-fetched comparison is being brought. So then you see far-fetched images. When I was talking about the vision of India's of spice and mine, which is brought to the bedroom of the two lovers in the poem The Sun Rising. And you, of course, are familiar with the sort of compass image which he uses in a valediction forbidding morning. Then you, of course, you are familiar with this Andrew Marvell poem to his coy mistress, where he talks, but at my back I hear time's winged chariot hurry near. So these kinds of similes which are not conventional, this is not something which usually poets do. That is why we call them so very unconventional, where the heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence, right? So this combination of dissimilar images, or is called metaphysical conceit. This combination of dissimilar images or discovery of occult resemblances in things apparently unlike. Discovery of the occult resemblances in things apparently unlike are called metaphysical conceit. So in order to bring this sort of a metaphysical conceit, what they do is that they make use of all sorts of knowledge. They make use of all fields, right? They're making use of everything. Commonplace, esoteric, practical, theology, philosophical, scientific, everything is brought in together. See, in canonization, there is the comparison of the relationship between the lovers. As I told you before, it moves from one field to another field of knowledge, right? From commerce, it moves on to business, it moves on to the mythical birds, it moves on to historical memorials, and on and on. So they actually ransack all sorts of knowledge to bring the metaphysical conceit into the poem, right? So that is the second feature as far as the formal aspect of metaphysical poetry is concerned. Now the third one is use of hyperbole. Now hyperbole is a very favorite device which is used by metaphysical poets. You have this exaggeration. Hyperbole means exaggeration. You have in valediction, forbidding mourning, you have this, what is it, tear floods, right? You have this, what is it? You have this, no tear floods, no sigh tempests, right? Tear floods and sigh tempests, right? That is a kind of hyperbole which is being used. And when you're coming to his coy mistress, you have the description of the each and every part of the lover, which is 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze, 200 to adore each breast, 30,000 to the rest, an age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. So this is the sort of hyperbole which metaphysical poets use, and they make use of They also make use of paradox, they make use of puns, they play with language, and you have a very important essay, Language of Paradox, written by Cleon, which is very much dedicated to metaphysical poets. And you have that how metaphysical poetry is a best example for the use of paradox, which he exemplifies by using the poem, the canonization, right? So, and another feature of metaphysical poetry is that they are very argumentative in nature. See, the metaphysical poetry is often arranged around a very urgent or heated argument. Probably you have this reluctant mistress, as you see in The Flea, or to his coy mistress, or you have a friend, or a friend to whom the person is speaking, or God, or death. See, you have a very beautiful poem, which is a conversation, not a conversation, which is an addressing to where he is addressing death. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, thou art not so. So, everywhere what happens is he's trying to, or the metaphysical poets are trying to argue in verse. See, if you are taking valediction, forbidding mourning, you see who are affected by my love. Who are the people who is affected by my love? Nobody is affected by it. No, it is in canonization. Oh my God. It is in canonization. Alas, alas, who is injured by my love? It's very much argumentative, kind of a heated discussion, right? The first sentence, the first line itself is actually a kind of a heated discussion. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me laugh. So that is how discussions are happening. Then you have to his coy mistress, you have a very beautiful argumentation going on. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. So that is an argument which is going on between a kind of he is trying to convince his beloved about the need for love making. So therefore, those lines could be taken as examples for the argumentative style of metaphysical poetry. Now, another feature of metaphysical poetry is that of obscurity. Obscurity, in the sense, most of the time we find like it's very complex to understand, right? Metaphysical poetry is quite complex to understand. But once you understand it, you reach some sort of a sublimity, right? There is a sublime understanding that is happening. That is what usually happens with literature. There is a very, you reach a height of understanding, right? You won't understand a bit, but then with the comparison of this flea and all, we think like, what is this? Then we understand it and you reach sublimity, right? So, let's say for example, in Sunrising, if I would try to explain this, In Sunrising, there are two worlds which are being described. There is this world of love, and there is this world of Bodhi. Now, world of love is of course timeless world, and world of Bodhi is of course timed world, right? Now, sun is the representation of the world of time. So, what in Sunrising, what John Donne wanted to try to let us understand is, you need the timed world to reach the timeless world, right? Now, what happens is you need to see it is only through the timed world, it is only through sun, it is only through the body that you reach the ultimate love. Or probably it is of course radical in the sense that it is always body mediated love, whereas in divinism it was not so, it was always souls, right? So, the last characteristic of metaphysical poetry that I would like to talk about is, their poems were quite dramatic in nature, right? Quite dramatic in nature. Probably the reason can be like Elizabeth was Elizabethan age, and Elizabethan age was drama age, right? Drama age, an age of drama. So the style that they were using in their poems are of course dramatic in nature. There would be somebody, right? There would be somebody who would be listening to their, they would be talking to somebody. Say for example, you have Go and Catch a Falling Star. That is a very beautiful poem by John Donne. Now he says, the first line goes like this: go and catch a falling star, get with child a mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Now, what happens is, this is kind of dramatic in nature. You're talking to somebody, you're telling somebody to go and catch the falling star. I mean, you have Sunrising again, that is quite much more dramatic. Busy old fool, unruly sun, it's dramatic. Then you have canonization, again very dramatic. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me laugh. And you have you have this presence of people, right? You have Batter My Heart. Batter My Heart is another beautiful poem. It's a very beautiful poem by which comes in his holy sonnets. It's like, batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, overthrow me and bend, your foes to break, blow, burn, and make me new. So we see that the metaphysical poetry is quite dramatic in nature. So these are the characteristics of metaphysical poetry. Theme-wise, I told you the characteristics, and form-wise, I explained the characteristics. I hope you understood this. Thank you.